And good evening, Boson Bay Presbyterian Church. How are you doing? I feel like we've been doing this for a very long time now, and there's lots of these moments where we get on the news and it seems like there's these glimmers of hope that maybe things might end soon. Um, we're all praying for that. I think we have been, and I think that's very good. Uh, but I think it's also good to say here we are now. We're still struggling with this. We're not yet out of lockdown and curfew, and um, so things are still hard. Things are still good, and I think this series on loneliness is still really important. What we've seen so far about loneliness is that it's built in to our design. That God made man in His image, and God has always been in community, and so for you to feel loneliness is no more sinful than for someone who hasn't eaten in a long time to feel hungry. That hunger is built in, that's part of our design, that we're made to be satisfied by food. We need it for nourishment and pleasure. And so in the same way, you become more and more who you were created to be when you are not alone. And I think that's by design, and it's important and good and healthy. We talked last week about how perhaps loneliness is more widespread than we give it credit for. Loneliness isn't just the old spinster widow with 40, 50, 60 cats. That the idea is we think what loneliness is someone crying at home because they don't have any friends and things like that. But loneliness looks like a lot of things. Last week we said nobody really knows me. But if they did know me, they would either reject me or overlook me. So if you've ever felt rejected, that people are actively seeing you and dismissing you, or if people are just overlooking you, if people never really see you, if never people really know you, that's going to trigger feelings of loneliness. That I think it's possible to be in a crowded room or a crowded city or an island full of people and to feel lonely. While at the same time, the goal is connection. That you and another person could be together in a way that you're not even speaking at all, and you can feel less alone. I think that's important. The book of Job, I think, is a really interesting study for this. We're going to spend some time there, and then we'll bounce around to some Psalms later. But the book of Job has a lot to say because Job is a man in grief, so he's not primarily first and foremost dealing with loneliness. He's a man dealing with grief. And so grief is like a feeling that happens to us. It's a fear, it's a wound, it's a sensation, it's a thing that happens. That he lost all of his family, he lost all of his health, he lost all of his wealth. And so like that happened to him, and his feelings of grief were very real. And so his friends come, and his friends see him from a distance, and from a distance they see the state that he's in. They themselves rend their clothes, and they put sackcloth and ashes on themselves. From a distance, they could tell just how wrecked he is by his grief. And for a week, they just sit there quietly with him. And I think that presence does a lot when we're in grief, when we're in sadness, when we're feeling alone. What we really need is presence. I'm alone, and so no one's with me. I need someone's presence. And that's good. But what we really need is connection. And that's what ends at the end of that week. When his friends start to question him, when his friends start to bring judgment on Job, his friends they start to say, well, there's a reason this must happen. What did you do? And they start accusing him of these sins. They start accusing him of certain problems. And the problem is, like, for one, it's always awful to feel accused, particularly unjustly, that he hadn't done the things his friends are accusing him of, and that's just an awful feeling. But what's really awful is that they went from the state of connection, that they're all mourning and grieving together, to a state of judgment, to a state of disconnection. What's really just super sad is that the friends, they looked at him and said, you've done something wrong. There's something about you which isn't true of me. There's something worse about you. There's something bad about you. There's something less about you. which is where we get those feelings of rejection or overlook from. And it just drives disconnection. They couldn't relate to what Job is going through, and they didn't even try to imagine what Job is going through. Like, if someone's suffering some awful thing that you've never suffered, you don't have to say, yeah, I know what that feels like, but you can always say, like, gosh, thank you for sharing with me. Like, I can barely imagine what that would be like. It's just this, either you're attempting to connect or you're attempting not to connect, and that makes all the difference in the world. There's one author that we had to read in seminary. Her name is Brene Brown. She's a researcher. I've mentioned her before in a few things. She spent her life dedicated to the sociological research of connection, what drives connection. But at one point, she was dealing with a personal, a heavy loss. So not her children or her husband, but she was dealing with an intensely personal, sad loss. And she was sad, and as she should be. But what she started to do is that she felt herself feeling all these different things, that she was angry at some points, that she was bargaining at some points, that she was denying that it had happened at some points, and she realized just like she felt so alone until she like labeled those things like, wait a second, I'm experiencing the 5 stages of grief. She said people have written books about this, people like in talks, like this is like an actual thing, the 5 stages of grief. And she just realized, oh, wait a second, like what I'm feeling is everyone who goes through grief feels this. And so none of that took her grief away, but she connected to a human experience. Oh, we all go through, I'm not alone in these feelings. This is something everybody feels. And when she felt that way, it suddenly just made her grief easier. So if you're having hard times, it's always hard to go through hard times. But if you're going through hard times and you feel alone, if you have a feeling or a fear or a wound or a struggle and you feel alone in it, that loneliness is often way worse than the thing itself, right? But so the important thing is that your fears and wounds and joys and sorrows and all of these things are actually far more common than you realize. Your fears, your deepest concerns are likely shared by others. The things you're going through, someone else may have gone through. That's one of Paul's encouragements to the letter to the church in Corinthians. He says, may the God of all comfort comfort you so that you might comfort others with the same comfort that you have been given. This idea that if you're going through something, that one of the opportunities is that other people are probably going through something like this too. That you're probably not the only person in your circumstance. You're probably not the only person struggling with the same things. I think that's one of the reasons the coronavirus has been so interesting, is because it's been global. It's not just our whole island dealing with it. It's not just the whole Caribbean. It's the planet is struggling with this. And so in some ways we're all in our homes alone, but in some ways we feel more connected on a worldly stage that way. So here's the technique. Here's what to do. If you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling like I have this feeling, this sorrow, this joy, this sadness, anything like that, share it. And so if you're just feeling lonely, you can tell people, hey, I'm feeling lonely. And chances are someone else is feeling lonely too. If you are sad, if there's a loss in the family sometimes, we all kind of sometimes feel like we have to be the strong one or whatever. But if you go first and you say, you know what, I'm just really sad about the loss of so-and-so, like chances are you're going to be doing everyone else in that room a favor, because everyone else in that room is probably feeling some variation of that too. It's just, I remember this happened in school all the time. Like the professor would be explaining something and he thinks that it's being clear and obvious, but you're listening, you're like, wait a second, what he said just makes no sense. I don't understand his instructions, but like it feels so obvious that it's wrong, but the problem is no one else is saying anything. And then you like eventually you raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, did you mean this? And he goes, oh yes, of course I meant this. And then the whole room just breathes a sigh of relief because one person was brave enough to ask and say the obvious thing. So if you are feeling lonely, say it. Just shout it out on Facebook, even if that sounds weak. Just be weak for a little bit. Reach out to a neighbor, reach out to a family member, friend. Just tell someone that you're feeling lonely. Go for it, and chances are you are doing people a favor because they're probably feeling lonely too. It's funny to sometimes think about how many teenagers or even just young adults are sitting at home alone on a Friday night, wishing that they had someone to go out and spend time with. So you have all these houses with all these teenagers, and they're all just saying, why is no one going to hang out with me? They just are imagining big, huge parties where everybody's at, and they're the only ones alone. But really, the reality is that most of them are alone. And if you do the bold thing, if you say, call someone, if you text someone, you say, hey, I don't have anyone to hang out with tonight. What are you doing? Can we spend time together? And that could just make all the difference because they will feel so relieved that you share that you were lonely too, and that can make a huge difference. Start your own traditions. Get people together for a game of dominoes. Like, just put yourself out there and do this. And what you don't do is that you don't demand things. You're not entitled. You can't control people. You can't guilt trip. Resist the urge to like try to elicit sympathy in like a manipulative kind of way. Like, oh, nobody's hanging out with me. I don't know why they would. Like, you don't say things like that to try to like trick people into it. You're not making demands on, hey, if you don't hang out with me, then we're not friends. You're not demanding. You're not manipulating. But you can be confident. You can be confident that your needs matter. You can say, yeah, I am struggling, and it would help me if we could hang out. And be confident that your needs matter, and be confident that you're often doing someone a favor by being open and honest. Be confident that it's actually a loving and good thing to share your heart and to move towards each other, to make connection happen instead of disconnection. So there's risk with this. I'm telling you to ask people, and it's possible that you might get rejected, or you might just get overlooked. Like, what would be harder for you personally if you ask a group of people, hey, can anyone spend time with me this weekend or whatever? Would it be hard if they just said no? Why would we want to spend time with you? Or would it be harder for just no one to respond and just like for crickets and just both of that is really scary. That'd be really hard to be rejected. It's really hard to be overlooked. And I have 3 things for that as far as techniques to move past that fear of being rejected, that fear of being overlooked. One is that it's less likely than you think. Like I said before, loneliness is built in. We're all designed for it. People are just generally grateful and glad if you reach out. That doesn't mean they always have the schedule, the time, the capacity to receive you as you reach out, but people are generally glad that you do. If they can't do it right then, they'll say, yes, I can't do it now, but why don't we try next week at this time or something like that. And the technique is to not just leave that open end, just try to book the next one. So yes, you may get rejected or overlooked, but that's less likely to happen than you think. But it's not impossible. You might. But here's another thought: your anxiety, your fear of being rejected or overlooked, you spend time with that fear, and it leads you to inaction. It leads you to not reach out. It leads you to not make that phone call or to visit your neighbor. You're already experiencing rejection and being overlooked in that moment. The more time you spend worrying and anxious about that, you're already experiencing the negative effects. So they might say no, they might reject you, they might overlook you. And if they do, that will hurt. But your anxiety leading you to not ask means that you're basically already experiencing that hurt already. So you're already dealing with the negative effects. So you might as well take the chance and potentially receive the benefits of connection happening. Um, but thirdly, just if you ask, if you're vulnerable and you put yourself out there, and if they reject you or overlook you, that's just an honest opportunity just to come before the Lord with all your pain. That's just one of the best things about being a Christian, is that Jesus says, like, can a mother forget the child nursing at her breast? God says, but in Isaiah, he says, yes, even these may forget. But see, I will never forget you. I've engraved you in the palm of my hand. This idea that God will never ever reject you. He will not overlook you. God is intensely interested in his children. He knows how many hairs are on your head. He loves you. He's fascinated by you. He made you, and he's shaping you and growing you and making you his own. And so when you feel that, like that's the good news, is that if you get rejected, if you get overlooked, if you put yourself out there and ask, and they say no, they can still never cut you off from God. That's painful to get that no, but it doesn't have to utterly destroy you. Like, the stakes are lowered because you have the secure foundation in Christ. If you have that secure relationship to God, you will feel the pain when human relationships fail you. But it's not going to destroy you. Your foundations can still be strong. That the winds and the waves will batter and damage the house, but you can still be secure. But then also you get to come before the Lord honestly. Like, you can pour your heart out and really just describe how much that hurts and describe that, and that's just a deeper intimacy with the Lord. So please ask, reach out, take the risk. Because you're going to be doing other people a favor. You're going to be working towards connection, which is always God's work. People are likely to say yes, but if they say no, good things can happen from that too. So it's always better to try than to not try. I also just want to say that can be really hard. Not only the fear of getting rejected and overlooked, it's just difficult from like a purely skills kind of a sense to talk about real things. It's hard to have the capacity to discuss hard, deep, real, true, painful, or even joyful things. So joy is a little easier. Sometimes we have that moment, but where like something good happens and you just burst out and you tell the whole world and people celebrate with you. But sorrow is harder to talk about because people might reject that or just overlook it as painful. So it's okay to start small. If you're reaching out and you just want to tell people, hey, I'm really struggling with loneliness, that could be hard to say. So say it if you can, but like it's also just good to say, let's play dominoes, or what TV shows they've been watching, or can we cook food together? Can we get coffee together, like after the quarantine's done and things like that? You could start with the weather. You could start with those things, and like one thing that's always fascinating to me is that when I go to major sporting events in the United States where there's 20, 30, 40,000 people all in one stadium, there's something fascinating just about, like, I don't know any of these people. We don't have that relationship, but we all care about the same thing, and there's something fascinating about that. And so, yeah, being a sports fan of the same team isn't like a deep, intimate connection, but there is just something connective about it. So don't be afraid to start small. There's nothing wrong with that. That can actually be really, really great. But it's hard to talk about real things, but I want to say it is absolutely worth it. There's something called Post Secret. This is an art project that began over a decade ago by a man named Frank Warren. He lived in the United States, in Maryland, and he went around a town one day with blank postcards with his address on it, and the one side said, artfully share a secret with me and mail it to this thing. So he handed out hundreds of these blank postcards just to people, asking them to write a secret on it in an artful way. And then his mailbox got flooded with these postcards in return. People were sharing their deepest, most personal, painful secrets with this complete stranger. And so he had this big pile and he didn't know what to do with it. So he started asking for more, and he started handing out more postcards and put up his address online and said, just send me these things. He's received over 1 million of these postcards. He scans his favorite ones each week and he puts them up on a blog. He's actually, he has the blog with the most visitors, the the blog without any advertisers. So he does this all free. He doesn't advertise anything. So the most visitors for a non-advertised blog, and he's just printed them. He's made, I think, 5 books now, so you can go and buy these books. The library here in West Bay has one of these books where you can go and just leaf through page after page after page of people's deep personal secrets. The question is why do these secrets make such a profound impact? Because you don't know the person sharing a secret, and most of these secrets are not something that you can quite relate to. One was talking about like spitting in his boss's coffee cup kind of thing. I've never done that, but you know what? I have sometimes felt a boss that's really hard to work with, and so the question, I think that there's this deep truth that I want to share with you. That the answer is that the more the more personal something is. So that the deeper, closest, the more secret, the more personal it is, private it is to you, the more personal something is, the more universal it becomes. Think about it this way. There are things that all humans share, and some things that not everyone, but most humans share. There's just things about being human that makes us all connected. I'm just going to read a list of these things that I found online. This is just a random list, but we all have these feelings sometimes. It says the sense that time keeps going faster and faster. The fear that you are not as sad about the loss of a loved one as you should be. You have the awareness of how few days of your life are actually memorable. You know the uncertainty of feeling if you will be missed by your loved ones. The sorrow of having a dream die. The desire to feel things as intensely as you did when you were young. How about the fear that you're no longer able to change? What about the suspicion that everyone else fits neatly into some category, but you don't? All of these things, like Brene Brown, her grief was so painful, but then she realized, wait a second, this is a shared universal experience. The loss of a loved one, in some sense, is something that only you will ever truly experience, because other people love that loved person too, but they didn't have the same relationship. That there's nothing more private and personal is your loss of a loved one. Yet at the same time, that is one of the most universal experiences, that you can't live long in this world without losing a loved one. That everyone knows what that's like. This is also something that's well attested to in Scripture. Think about these Psalms. I'm going to read the title, but then also the little caption under the title. What about Psalm 57? Psalm 57 is for the director of music to the tune of Do Not Destroy. It's written by David when he had fled from Saul in the cave. He says, have mercy on me, O God, have mercy, for in you my soul takes refuge. Psalm 59 says, when Saul had sent men to watch David's house in order to kill him. Psalm 63, a psalm of David when he was in the desert of Judah. O God, you are my God, earnestly I seek you, my soul thirsts for you, my body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. What about Psalm 51? Psalm 51 is for the director of music, a psalm of David when the prophet Nathan came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. David is describing intensely personal experiences. These are poems of deep self-reflection. He's diving deep into his own emotions and experiences and feelings and fears and wounds and sadnesses. Uh, Yet he wrote them down, and Israel decided these were our hymns. These are the things that we need to read and share and read aloud together. Psalm 63 says, "In a dry and weary land where there is no water." David wrote this when he was fleeing in the desert. I have never been lost in a desert. I've never really been without water for any longer than just a short amount of time. But Psalm 63 can speak to my soul. That I don't share the circumstances of Psalm 63. I've never been chased by Philistines. I've never been, my rival king has never sent orders to have me killed. Psalm 51, I've never committed adultery with Bathsheba and had that woman's husband killed. But Psalm 51 is one of the most universal hymns of confession the world's ever known. Because I have sinned. I have guilt. I have things that I have done wrong. And Psalm 51 helps me. When I read Psalm 51, I understand my own sin better. Even though, adultery and murder are way beyond me in some sense. But David shares that, and Israel and God's people sing it together. Connection happens, and we all are just less alone. So like I said, it's hard to ask. It's hard to share these deeper things. It's hard to start your own tradition. If you find that very difficult and scary and hard, it's good just to start by connecting to humankind. So this isn't necessarily you connecting to another person, but spend time today, spend time this week, just connecting to humankind. Spend time this week just realizing that your pains and sorrows and joys, your fears, your hopes, all these things are things that are shared by humanity. That could bridge the biggest gaps that we have. And if you can connect to humankind, that's going to later equip you to deal with particular humans. I had a friend whose boss was just miserable. His boss was always making his life hard. He was yelling at him, and he was just afraid to go to work because he was just afraid of getting in trouble with his boss. And then he started to think about the fact how that fear of getting in trouble is just really universal. And then he realized what he knew about his particular boss is that his boss had a boss. And so his boss's boss was always riding his boss and making him miserable and making him get in trouble, making him fall afraid. And so he realized that he's sitting there, and now his boss is still being mean to him. His boss is still mistreating him. But he can sit there and be like, wow, like, he's just like me. He's just afraid of getting in trouble with his boss. That didn't help the relationship. His relationship with his boss was still hard. He still didn't like going to work. It's not this magic that fixes everything. But it can give you a little more peace. It can make you feel less alone. You can feel more connected to that broader human experience. And that gives you a greater sense of security. That gives you more confidence. And that helps you start to deal with individuals. You could start to move towards your family members who you're estranged from. You can start to have harder conversations with friends and bosses and things like that, and really move from being more alone to being more connected. And I think that's huge. So tonight I want you to pray. Read through some of those Psalms if you get the chance. Psalm 51 in particular, 57, 59, 67. These are all very personal moments in David's life. But when you read them, you can just really feel your heart sing and resonate with the deeper human experience that we all share. And then pray that God would make you connected to your fellow brothers and sisters in that way, that you can grow in that sense of compassion and kindness, that grow in that sense of believing that you are not alone, that your experiences matter and your experiences resonate with other people. So start there. Ask God to make you aware of that connection, to show you that you're not alone. Ask God to show you that He will never leave you nor forsake you. And then pray for those who feel more alone than perhaps you. Maybe you have a whole family in lockdown with you. Pray for those who are locked down all by themselves. Pray for those who are struggling or in home situations where they might even be sharing a bed with someone, but they just feel super alone, even in that bed with them. Pray for those people who feel that alone. And then pray for the courage and the strength to ask, to share your feelings, to share what's going on, and to reach out. And then reach out to others as well. This is God's work, and I think this is teaching and help that can make us very relevant to a lonely generation and a lonely secular people. God has something better for us than perpetual loneliness. So, thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for spending this time with all of us, that we're all doing this together. I've been trying to emphasize that because it makes us feel more connected. So I'm looking forward to seeing you, hopefully really soon. Pay attention to the WhatsApp and email. We'll be giving out more directions on what the gradual reopening can look like. But for now, just assume things are the way they have been for the last 2 months, and we'll move forward from there. Have a good evening. Bye.